Alright, I pushed record, just to warn you.
Oh, okay.
Just don't say anything you wouldn't want on record. That doesn't mean you have to behave or anything.
Oh, okay.
Well, do you want to just tell me the story however you remember it from the beginning? Or do you want me to ask you specific questions?
What's best?
Where do you think the story begins?
Well, it begins when I did not really come out as gay until my second year of seminary. I was doing my clinical pastoral education in Omaha, Nebraska. And it was during that time that I came out to my supervisor, and it was quite a cathartic experience for me. And when I went back to seminary, I almost told everybody, I'm gay, I'm liberated. I realized it was a major mistake because many of my friends recoiled and stuff like that. So that year, we had to make a decision as to where we wanted to go on our vicarage. And that was in Concordia Seminary, Missouri Synod, in St. Louis. And I said, I don't care, send me where you want. Would you like to learn Spanish? Send it down to South Texas. Sure. So they sent me down to South Texas, and I took a crash course in Spanish, and then was transferred down to the lower Rio Grande Valley in McAllen, Texas, where I was assigned to a Mexican-American congregation, Lutheran congregation, the Mexican-American supervisor, who was a Springfield graduate, conservative. This is before Seminex happened. And of course I think it was late 1973 that the walk-off on campus, or early 74, that the walk-off took place. Then the students and the faculty walked off the 801 on campus and then formed Seminex, over at St. Louis University. And so I had to make a decision as to where I was going to go back to seminary after I finished my vicarage. Well, it was during that time that I met my then-to-become husband, Roberto Flores, in the lower Rio Grande Valley. And we started developing a relationship, and of course we kept it rather hidden, while I was still being a vicar. But he really helped me with my Spanish, and well, my supervisor was so impressed about how well I was doing in preaching in Spanish, and how did I learn those colloquialisms and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so I have my little secret weapon there. And so what happened is I, finished my internship. Roberto and I moved back to St. Louis together for my last year of seminary. He enrolled at Washington University in St. Louis. Got his master's in psychology. I got her graduated, and then I went before I was certified for ordination. I went before the chair of the certification committee to basically let him know about my situation, that I was gay, having a relationship. His response was, I won't, block your certification because of that, but you do have to promise me that you'll seek counseling. So I went to see a counselor. Sure, I went to see a counselor. The counselor said, what's the problem?
Yeah, you seem fine.
So yeah, so I got ordained, and took my first call to St. John's Lutheran Church in San Francisco, which was then still Missouri Synod congregation. And it was there that Roberto came with me, and I told my supervising pastor at the time, Walter Grum, that about our situation. And his counsel was just, that's okay, just don't keep it quiet. Don't let anybody else know. Come to find out, behind my back, he already told other people in the congregation. So there's this constant, need to counsel deceit, and not to let me tell people, So to make a long story short, I was there for 2 years, and then Roberto, my late husband, got a call. He was a Roman Catholic priest, by 3 ALC Lutheran congregations in Houston. They wanted to call a Latino, because Lutherans don't have too many Latino pastors. They're pretty white.
Still.
And even though I spoke Spanish, they really wanted somebody who was Latino. And so they called him to be an outreach minister for 3 Lutheran congregations in Houston. He accepted the call. I went to Houston with him, unemployed. and developed a ministry with undocumented immigrants with funding from Partners in Mission, which was an AELC mission arm. And by that time I had already changed over to AELC when I was still in San Francisco, because that whole thing happened at that time. So got funding from there, and also with the Legal Aid Corporation in Houston to start this ministry with undocumented immigrants. At the same time, I was also meeting with a group of disaffected Missouri Synod Lutherans in Houston area, because we didn't have an AELC congregation in all of Houston. And so we decided to form a small AELC congregation called New Life Lutheran Evangelical Church, New Life Evangelical Lutheran Church. And we met in the Episcopal Church, and we were small, but you know, a really progressive group of people and families. And so in, I think it was May of 1979, I forget what the month was, but we had our, you know, Texas was a province of the Southwest Regional Synod of the Association of Evangelical Lutheran Churches. There were 4 states in the Southwest Regional Synod: Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska. And so I and a couple lay people went up to Irving, Texas, where Donna was
I was on the staff.
on the staff of the Good Shepherd Lutheran Church, where the assembly was held, the convention. And it was during that convention that we had to elect new leadership in the different regional caucuses, and that was the Texas caucus, because the provincial bishop at that time was Ed Schwanke from Austin, and he was stepping down. So they had nominations, and my name was put in nomination right away, and seconded, and boom, I was elected unanimously. So caucus ended. I was happy. I wasn't looking for that position, you know, I wasn't even seeking it. And then all of a sudden I get cornered by one of the AELC executives, Ellen Ewald, at a reception at someone's home that night. And the presiding bishop was also at that reception, and he looked very, very serious and very concerned when he heard news of my election. He says, you know, you need to do one of 2 things, Ellen Ewald told me. You need to either tell the people who elected you the truth, that you're homosexual and living with somebody, or withdraw. And I went over and talked to Bishop Stutland too, and he felt the same way. So, okay. Spent an almost sleepless night that night. Came back the next day, the caucus was reconvened, and I got up there and hemmed and hawed. I started out by saying, well, I really need to let you know, I need to reconsider the fact that I accepted this position. And then finally I just said, to hell with it, I'm going to come out and tell the truth. I am gay, and I'm living in a relationship with a man I love very much. So I ask you to reconsider your election of me as your bishop, your provincial counselor, or whatever you want to call it, right away. And Donna will attest to this. The people, the lay people there.
Well, first of all, it was like no big deal, and then people started talking to it, talking theologically to it. You remembered one. I had remembered somebody saying, "Well, you know, he's a good pastor. That's why we elected him."
What does this have to do with his ability to be our bishop?
Yeah.
Or another one said, I've known Danny for a long time, I love him very much. Things like that. So.
And so then the presiding bishop, Stutman, of the South,
Comes into the room.
and so now he says, well, you know, you've had this emotional response to this. I don't know, did he think we were saving you, or I don't know what it was. But anyway, he had this emotional response. Or maybe he thought it was groupthink. I don't know what it was. But anyway, he said, so you have to caucus again, but as smaller groups, like congregations.
Hoping
or,
to divide people up.
You know, and so that you talk this over about the implications.
Really figure out how horrible your decision
Well, and
making
what it will mean for the merger.
Mm-hmm.
I think then they were still calling it union, but for the merger. So we caucused, and in the group of 10 or 15 that I was, they said, well, it makes no sense to change our vote. You know, there is, the whole reason we left Missouri Synod was because of, for the sake of the gospel. And this is a gospel thing to do. So now all these different small groups came back together. They voted again and elected him with even a stronger vote than the first time.
You gained some more points there, huh?
Well, and I was telling him that what had happened with these laity that had gone through this whole Missouri thing, they knew how to do theology, and at these assemblies, what would always be a primary portion of the meeting together would be to do theology. I mean, you'd get some issue and you'd think through it theologically. And
Right.
so anyway, so we voted, and then
the bishop came back in and says, we can't, we just can't allow this to happen. It will jeopardize union talks with the ALC and the LCA. We will do, you know, in exchange for Reverend Harms. My name was Daniel Harms at the time. That's another story. No offense.
No offense. Maybe I should, but...
And I love that. I love being the Reverend Harms, but there was something that happened later that just didn't work out. But anyway, so I said, they said, you either, you know, if you will withdraw from this position, we'll do a study on homosexuality in the church. So I could see the, you know, handwriting was on the wall. I could see the pressure was being brought to bear on these lay people not to let this happen. One of the pastors, I think in Garland, Texas, says, well, we just can't have a gay bishop, for crying out loud, you know. And so I graciously withdrew because of the pressure that I saw being brought to bear, and they had another election, and Mark Herdner was elected my successor, Bishop of Texas, Provincial Bishop of Texas, and then, you know, they put together some kind of a study commission, but there were no LGBT people on that commission whatsoever.
They did like 3 different studies, didn't they?
Well, it was one study called the homosexual. It was all about brokenness. That was the theme of the study, being broken. And it was just this graphic on the cover of the study. They had this faceless man and this faceless woman looking down in shame on homosexuality in the church. And it was just, you know, it was a charade. So just a couple months after I left there, and I was no longer bishop, you know, went home. Now I still had my call intact. I was going to go home and continue my work with New Life Lutheran and also with my undocumented ministry. And I get a letter from my successor, Mark Herdner, saying, we need to talk. The Synod Council met and voted to remove you from the clergy roster unless you terminated your homosexual liaison. Was the language that was used in the resolution.
And just
divorce.
Parenthetically, when he withdrew, there was just a sadness with the laity. I mean, because people really.
There was joy. There was no longer joy.
That's right. There had been joy, and then it went to, and I think it was kind of disbelief that this
heavy-handedness happened.
Yeah, and when a lot of them had done a lot in leaving a church body that they had been part of for such a time as this, and then to see it just happen. I mean, so it was, and then well, I moved from Texas shortly after that, but so I didn't ever even follow up with everything that followed. So continued it, but it was again the people who had elected them just took the joy out.
One of the things I do recall during that whole thing with the Texas caucus at that convention, that assembly in 1979, was this man who walked up to me during the whole caucusing of the different caucuses, and he came up and shook my hand, young, rather handsome man, farmer from Oklahoma, and says, Pastor, I just have one question for you. what came first, your knowledge that you were homosexual or your call into the ministry? I said, wow, I never thought of it that way before. So I thought, and I said, well, I felt my call, felt called to go into the ministry when I was 5 years old. I'll never forget that. I guess I didn't discover my sexual orientation until I was like reached puberty. So I guess to answer your question, I guess my call into the ministry is what I felt first before I discovered my sexual orientation. He says, well, that's good enough for me, Pastor. He shook my hand, walked away. I never saw him again. Disappeared. So I felt that kind of like a visit from an angel. So to make a long story short, I went back and I got this letter saying I'm going to be removed from the clergy roster unless I terminate my relationship with Roberto, the homosexual liaison. I challenged it. I said lack of due process. I was already doing paralegal work, you know, and so I knew the language. And I says I demand a hearing before the Synod Council. And they granted me a hearing, and in March of 1980 I went to Wichita, Kansas, and sat before this room of very glum-faced council members, pastors and clerk laity, including some people who were classmates of mine back at St. John's College in Winfield, Concordia Senior College, people who I considered friends, and here they were sitting in judgment upon me. And I basically wrote a paper for them beforehand, shared it with them, and then they just sat there and their minds were already made up. So I had my hearing. Of course, they voted to reaffirm their original position that they would terminate me unless I terminated my relationship with Roberto. So I appealed that to the church convention floor. And in 1980, it was supposed to come before the convention in Omaha, Nebraska. My mother and my brother were both living up there at the time, and they came with me, and I think intimidated the living daylights out of everybody, even though they didn't understand me that well or accept me that well. But they loved me, you know. And
Moms are scary.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So Stupman had to put the vote off. He was so intimidated by that, you know, that I had family up there. 1983.
So they made a resolution to get rid of all gay people because you were such a good pastor that you got recognized?
All openly about practicing homosexual clergy will be removed from the clergy roster. To their knowledge, I was the only one, but
just in case.
In case.
Yeah.
And we don't want to make this so ad
So
hominem.
it's not personal.
It's not personal. No,
No, it makes it policy,
Yeah.
It makes
not
it,
an attack.
exactly,
So that
exactly.
Make it broad enough that.
So, I mean, obviously I was crushed.
Yeah.
You know, feeling very alone during that whole process, and then I had to drive all the way home to Houston from there. But before I left,
You drove all the way from Omaha to Houston
it was
thinking about
Great
that?
Bend, Kansas.
Oh, Kansas. That's a drive still, though.
Yes, it is.
Whew.
I think I spent the night in a hotel in Dallas or something like that. But anyway, before I left, the treasurer of the Southwestern Regional Synod walks up to me and says, Pastor, I'm so sorry about this vote, but you know, if the church ever changes its position on this, I'll be the first to send you a letter of apology. I'm still waiting for that letter. Of course, the merger took place in 1986-87. So, I mean, that was, goodness, 4 years afterwards.
It's funny because I've heard a lot of people say that the church, if the ELCA merger hadn't happened, would have been really close to letting gay pastors serve openly, and so it's just interesting to hear the inevitability of it all kind of closing before it.
But I think the point she was making too is that we had there was this spirit, this freedom. The lay people were so far ahead of the clergy on this, and it was like the Holy Spirit was being given a chance to operate in that room. It was just unbelievable. And it was lay driven, it was certainly not clergy driven. They were gutless and fearful and all that kind of stuff. So it was just terrific. And then somehow you were implicated in all this. I have to go look up those minutes and find out how you were. Because of...
Yeah, so it was, I had gotten a divorce in '78 while I was on the staff. I was teacher and DCE at Good Shepherd in Irving. And then remarried, well, just probably weeks before this, in July of '79, remarried to Norm Behrman, who had been a provincial bishop too before
Ed
your
Schwanke.
election.
Ed Schwanke was the provincial bishop.
And he had resigned from parish ministry and had gone to a year-long CPE and had switched to being a chaplain. And so we got married and moved to San Antonio. And then...
You did?
Yeah, for, well, he was already living there, so I just joined him in San Antonio.
Okay.
I was still living in Irving. And then we moved from, then he got the call out here to be chaplain and religious coordinator at Contra Costa County. And then moved out here, and then that's when I went to PLTS. And when we came out here, we were kind of wondering, okay, now it's a new bishop, and maybe we better, that was Wally Brown. And so we made an appointment with him and said, just wanted to let you know, we both were divorced, remarried, now we're going to be out here. And so, you know, he said, you know, thanks for telling me, but, you know, that we don't have any rules against that. And so it wasn't until I was reading the Synod Council minutes about the vote to remove him, that then there was this sentence in there of some accusations regarding a teacher, again, no names, but a teacher at Good Shepherd with accusations of conduct unbecoming. And so the provincial bishop was supposed to talk to me. I mean, reading it, and I'm thinking, this is me. He never talked to me.
Wow.
I never knew what the accusation was. Nothing was done about it. But I mean, so it was strange for a couple of things. I mean, first of all, if an accusation was made that I wasn't even told about the accusation when it was talked about, or did they just think, oh, thank God she moved out to a different synod?
Or were they mad that you got divorced? Who knows? Because it would be really funny if they were trying to make him get divorced, and they were mad that you were divorced.
Or
it would be surprising, unfortunately.
Or maybe they were more mad that I'd gotten remarried. Maybe that was the thing. I don't know. But
Oh, the scandal of it all.
the scandal of it all.
You both were troublemakers then.
We were. We didn't really hardly know each other. And
So did you then not be a pastor?
well, basically, you mean after I was removed from the clergy roster
Yeah.
by fiat or whatever that was, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I ceased being a pastor, and I took that to mean that, you know, my ordination was revoked, but I guess it doesn't necessarily mean that. It means that I no longer have faculties to do what pastors do, I guess. So I went to law school after that. Because it was a natural segue for me, since I was already doing paralegal work in immigration law. And then I went to law school and got my law degree and passed the bar in 1987 and became a lawyer. So I went from gospel to law.
It's not very Lutheran.
I know.
So are there other questions that you have?
Yeah, but first, before I forget, you have to look at the camera and say who you are.
Oh,
I always forget
You
that.
gotta cut and splice and do that at the
I
beginning.
know. I know. I'll move it around. Yeah, you're good.
okay.
You go first.
Okay. I'm Donna Duensing, and what else am I supposed to say? Or just that I'm Donna Duensing?
You can have an affiliation if you want to have an affiliation.
I'm a retired ELCA clergy.
That-
And I'm Daniel Graney, also known as formerly Reverend Daniel Harms, and I am retired former clergy and attorney.
In that order, right?
Yes.
Well, do you remember? Well, how did you learn that that Guy had been elected a bishop? Do you remember learning about that?
Which guy?
Guy Irwin.
Oh,
His name's Guy. It's confusing.
correct, yeah. He's not only gay, he's also Native American.
Yeah.
So I always like to think, you know, that we're all connected somehow.
Oh,
So
yeah.
you can't just silo each other.
Yeah, yeah.
So I guess I learned about that after the last When did that happen? Did that happen when, what's her name was elected presiding bishop of the ELCA?
Yeah, it was right after she was elected, because then Mark Hansen
Eaton or?
could preside and talk like he wasn't going to be the presiding bishop anymore.
Okay.
So he was still in the role, but just she hadn't been installed yet. So it was
I see.
right in that interim
Eaton,
time.
whatever her name is.
Yep, Elizabeth.
Elizabeth Eaton. Well, so that's when I learned about it. I read about it. And of course I was very happy. I didn't even think about the fact that, well, did they call him the first gay bishop, you know?
The first in the LCA,
Yeah,
I think they call
in
it.
the LCA. Well, it was
You're pre.
in the predecessor body, yeah. But
That's right.
Yeah,
Did you
but-
think it would ever happen? That you'd ever see it when someone who got elected got to actually serve?
after the ELCA changed its policy in 2009, yes,
Yeah.
I did. I think that would happen. We'd have our own Bishop Robinson.
Right. Yeah. Did they install you after you accepted, or had it not happened yet? Because
No, it was
It
purely
was like
an
the
election.
next
There was no
day.
installation.
No, it just, I mean, they really squelched it so, I mean, and what we weren't aware of, so he was nominated, and when they were, that night before when they were, because you were nominated and then we voted the next day?
No, you voted the same day.
The same day, okay, and then we had to re-vote the second
Re-vote.
day, right, okay. But, so we
Yeah.
were, that night, we
That
were
caucus should have
excited.
been ended by then.
Yeah, so
But
we
they had to
were,
get called back into session
Yeah.
because of,
so we were celebrating.
yes, we
That
were.
was-
I was celebrating,
Yeah.
and then I got cornered by Ellen Ewald and
Yeah.
Bishop Stubman.
And,
Very somber faces.
and then as, then I also happened to be on the committee of the 70 or whatever, representing the AELC, because I was head of the educators task force for AELC, because when we left Missouri, then there was no support for Lutheran teachers, and we were called like clergy. We were called clergy, and non-ordained clergy. And so I was then on this committee of 70, and I kept, you know, the more we were going to this, well, first was called union, and then it changed to merger.
Mm-hmm.
I just kept thinking back and saying,
You're amazing.
we were, you know, we were so, because then a lot of other things that the AELC had done, like had that, the whole idea of ministry, so that teachers and DCEs were also considered calls, and, but then that was all forfeited in the merger too, because we had to do more studies of ministry on that, because, and then that.
But the point she's making is we had just come out of oppression, out of exile. And we're experiencing the freedom, you know, of being
That it was really going to be
led
something
by
new.
the Spirit, yeah, and all of a sudden, boom.
Yeah. And that gospel was going to be the main,
But it was an amazing experience, it really was.
just,
Unsettling, but amazing. Messed my life up,
Yeah.
turned it upside down, but.
just a humorous aside, when I was on the committee of 70, so I was representing the educators, and so there weren't many women on it. And then Will Hertzfeld, African American, and so at one of the times when we were having one of our meetings, and we get to the hotel, and Will and I are checking in, and they had put Will and me in the same room.
Oh my God!
And we both laughed, and we said, I guess they just figure you're the tokens, so you can just room together.
That's too funny.
Oh,
But you end up going on to be a big part of helping candidates for ministry who are gay
Yes.
go through the process.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little
yeah.
bit?
In fact, I was just telling him earlier, when, in fact, I started at PLTS in August of '89, and there was going to be the irregular ordination. And my husband, Norm Behrman, at the time, I mean, we had just been we were so happy this was happening. And he was going and participate with the laying on of hands, and I had this big decision to make because I would be working with all the candidacies, and if they would write me off before I ever started, then could I really be an advocate? And so I remember having coffee with Jeff and saying, you know, there's nothing more than to be able to be part of it, but I'm just afraid of how it will hamper what I might be able to do in the future. And so I was there, but I sat up in the balcony looking down instead of laying on hands. But then through it, and I was telling them that I finally had decided that I had a whole new sense of gaydar, because if I would, and I came home and told my husband Robert Smith this, I said, okay, so now if there's a student that comes in that's extremely gifted, just knows the gospel inside out, has it in their bones, and has this passion for justice and everything, you know, pretty soon there's going to be the knock on the door that asks for the confidential conversation, and they're going to tell me they're gay. And then I finally thought maybe God's plan was to only call the best and brightest LBGT, and then there wouldn't be anybody else to go to be ordained, except that the church would just have to change. So
Day without a Mexican.
Yeah. And so I would tell at orientation, I would say, okay, this is the rule of the church, but and I don't agree with it, and I'm working actively to change it. But then also told them that, you know, what my stance was, and so that they should recognize the power I had, because I would be filling out forms, so it had to be a level of trust, and it would just be up to them whether they could trust me that much. But if they wanted to talk about orientation, their own orientation, that they should ask for a pastoral conversation with me, and then it would be in confidence, and then I could strategize with them about how to maneuver it. And so that really felt good, and so I was on the journey with lots of people. And then, and I still believe the Spirit did just, in the same way that the Spirit was moving in that room, it's moved through the church, and now seems to be moving through the country. So pretty exciting.
It's pretty good. Were you ever a part of the ECP?
Oh yeah,
officially.
Yeah, I did. In fact, I think Ruth and Phyllis were some of the people that I actually approved through the process. So,
Wow.
so, and then was able to actually perform the actual legal marriage of Ruth and Phyllis, and then co-officiated for Jeff. So
How wonderful! How wonderful!
So it's been.
I saw Jeff last night with his partner,
Yeah.
with his
Yes.
husband Pepe.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're getting a little bit more of that joy back again. But this is really the first time that Dan and I have been able to talk about
After
what
all
happened.
these years.
Right. One, think of how many years the church lost of a
Yeah.
great pastor too. I know we're not supposed to talk about that because it would be sad if we thought about it, but
Well,
seriously.
you know, I was bitter and angry for years afterwards. I spent 4 years of my life fighting it, and it just took a toll on me, and my relationship with Roberto as well, because he was still practicing. He was still serving as a priest, a supply priest in a parish. And here I was defrocked, and he was still going, and so that created some tension in our relationship, and we had to sort through that. But yeah, especially since I felt the calling to be a pastor since I was 5 years old. It was like part of the gift of the Spirit that was there.
So what happened when you were 5?
My parents were attending an Episcopal church. My mother was Lutheran, my dad was Roman Catholic, and so they compromised and went Episcopalian. And we went to an Episcopal church in Norfolk, Nebraska, where we were living at the time. I was 5 years old, and we were very well-behaved children. My 2 brothers and me, and my sister was just born then. And we were sitting in the pew there, and there was a priest up there was preaching in a rather loud tone of voice. So when I got home from church, I asked my mother, I said, Mama, why does the preacher talk so loud? And I think she was just trying to blow me off, just so that the dead can hear Danny. And I thought, wow, that's a lot of power. I want some of that.
You were hooked.
I was hooked, man. That was powerful.
Oh, that's funny.
This was happening to me, so he knew. I didn't want him to read the newspaper somewhere.
Right.
And of course, he wrote me back in a very condemnatory letter and saying, you need to repent now before you go to hell, type of stuff. And I invited him and my mother to come down, visit us, spend time with us. They refused to do it, so I just basically wrote them off.
Literally.
There was just no love there. There was no love. I mean, they adopted me, and the summer after the adoption, I didn't feel much affection when we were on a camping trip, and then we were sitting out there around a campfire, and I said, Dad, I just don't feel much love here. And he says, well, we can always undo the adoption. His rather stoic attitude, their hair pastor attitude, you know. And that really hurt. Here I changed my last name. You know, I felt, you know, I really felt needy at the time, homeless. You know, I needed a place, and here they took me in, but this didn't give me much love or affection. But and then when I went away to seminary in St. Louis and told him about all the wonderful things I was learning at the senior college, and he felt threatened by that. That's liberal.
Was he a pastor?
Yeah, he was Missouri Synod, their hair pastor, yes.
No.
And actually, he was considered a moderate at the time, you know.
Huh.
And so his brother, their dad, was a professor at the senior college.
And also a pastor.
And also a pastor, right.
He had a transformative effect on my thinking, because I was pretty conservative when I got to senior college. And then the whole civil rights movement thing was going on, and Uncle Paul just put me in a corner and put his finger on my chest. I want to tell you this and this, and took me outside and showed me the autumn colors and the trees, and look at that, and it's free. I mean, he just painted a new perspective of life for me, and just opened me up. And plus, he gave me the attention, and I felt the love, you know, and I was invited to their home several times for meals while I was there at senior college, and I felt love there. So I got mismatched, but anyway.
Well, did Steve lead drummers at the service? Or am I confusing different people? There was a drumming group.
Yeah, there was
and
a
they wore
drum.
spandex.
You talking about yesterday?
Oh no, no.
At Jeff's ordination.
Oh, Jeff's
Were they led
That
by
was
Steve?
Spandex.
no, but that was.
I know, it was like straight drummers, but Jeff talks about it all the time. The drummers in spandex. Beautiful men.
Yeah, no, Steve wasn't one of the drummers. The radical thing that Steve and I did is when the new church, when the AELC came into being, and the organizing convention for Sierra Pacific in '88. So he was in charge of that worship, and so they had. The text was the raising of Lazarus, and so he had. I was celebrant, and then the sermon was this drama, because that was when Steve was still doing the Ruha, the drama ministry, and so my husband Norm Behrman was wrapped completely in gauze, completely. And so then it was this, and it was the whole thing of Lazarus come out, and so it was all about coming out, and people were so angry because they said this was all about homosexuality.
God.
And it was Lazarus coming out of the tomb. and the whole thing was this patchwork quilt, so there's this big quilt in the back, and so I had made this patchwork chasuble, and you know, just with scraps that I had around, and I'm putting it out. I mean, I'm doing it like the night before the assembly, still finishing up, you know, doing this patchwork chasuble, and I'm wearing it, and then they said, well, and then how you really got them angry is you had that pink triangle right on the top of your shoulder on that chasuble. I said, pink triangle? And I looked, well, sure enough, there were a couple of triangles, but one of them happened to be pink, and that one ended up being here. And so they thought it was all deliberate. And
Wow.
so Steve and I didn't get asked to do worship anymore, to be honest.
How interesting. So, my Granny is my birth name, and I changed it back in 1987 after I passed the bar and became closer to my siblings and stuff.
Oh, okay. So how many siblings do you have?
I had 3. One died in 2008. My second oldest, I'm the oldest, and my brother Gene lives in San Antonio. My sister Laura lives in Tennessee.
Oh, okay.
She's a nurse, so, yeah.
I still think we should work on getting you that apology letter. Is that person still alive?
I'm surprised that the ELCA has not done anything or even reconciling works to, not asking for reparations for defrocked clergy, but some kind of a formal
Well, because
apology.
what were those services called? Services of reconciliation.
They're originally called ordination services, and the only change that was made when they edited them was the title.
Which was?
A service of reconciliation. So
So
they kept the exact same liturgy, and they changed the title from ordination to service of reconciliation.
And so that's when people were. So I was just thinking, you know, because I think most of the people that had been kicked out have been.
Reinstated?
Yeah, everybody had to go through a
Colloquy?
thing.
Colloquy?
You had to go through a ritual with the bishop.
Oh.
You had to actually go through candidacy.
Really?
Yeah, we had to go through candidacy, and it was not fun. Because they had decided they were going to approve us at the beginning of it, but then they asked us 3 hours of questions anyway, and then told us at the end that we were approved. But you had no idea for those 3 hours.
Did that happen to you?
Yeah. Yeah. Because I was ordained extraordinarily, like Jeff was, and so I was there were 7 of us in San Francisco. We had to go, all of the gay pastors met in a retreat after the policy changed, and we met with the candidacy director of the ELCA, and we talked about how we were going to go through this, and they had just passed the reconciliation stuff, and Anita Hills, bishop in Minnesota, had her do candidacy prior to the rule change, because they wanted Anita to be first in Minnesota, but she didn't want to be first. She really didn't want to go through that attention again, and she got a lot of death threats during her process.
Really?
Yeah, and 40% of Lutherans live in Minnesota, and she lives in Minnesota, so like, you know, it's the equivalent of what's happening in Hollywood to be Lutheran in Minnesota. And so we did ours first because they thought, the pastors from the other parts of the country thought we'd be able to push the ELCA the farthest, because so they were synodical worship services, so the ELCA church-wide office had to approve every word in the service, and so there was a script. And some of the words that had to be said, there was actually 3 Council of Bishop meetings to finally come up with what the right would be. And it was not negotiable. You couldn't change a single word.
Yeah, it was even, I read one of the lessons and
This is after 2009?
Yeah, we weren't able to finally have our ritual until 2010. It took a year of the bishops trying to figure out what kind of service could happen. Because they were really afraid that other people would just ordain people and wait for time to change, right? And say, you're behind on this issue, so we're going to ordain them now, and you'll catch up with us later. And they didn't ever want to have to do this again. And so they were trying to create language that meant that we could do this, but no one else could do this. And yeah, it was a good time.
Yeah, because I remember the languaging, because I had been sent the scripture reading that I was reading, and then it said,
Oh
listen
yeah,
to
you
the
got
Spirit,
royally in trouble.
listen to the Spirit,
You did?
listen to what the Spirit of the Lord is saying, or something like that. And so then I get the program, and it's a more traditional
A script.
But anyway, I had the other one, so I just said it anyway.
And what's funny is that phrase was a deal breaker for the ELCA. They said, we know what you were trying to say, and if you would have said it this way, we would have approved it, but you didn't. So if you say anything like that, you can't have your service.
Oh,
And then you said it anyway, and it was awesome. And we were really
I'm always
happy.
a rebel.
We were really happy, and we thought you did it on purpose. You're really good at pushing the bar without knowing you're doing it.
That's great.
Yeah. But we got really fancy with our liturgy because there were parts that were like horrible, but we had to have them said.
Wow.
So we had an opera singer sing
Yeah, oh, it was great.
during
It was
the
great.
worst parts, and we had the bishop whisper the words in our ears so that no one other than us would hear them. Because they were so good. Yeah. Because they said we had to say them. They didn't say they had to be audible for everyone. Yeah.
So your adoption story reminded me, growing up, I was the youngest of 7, and I had this blonde hair, and my mom and dad both had black hair. And so, you know how they say, well, where did you know, this cute little comments about, well, where did you come from? And so I was like 6 or 7, and I am thoroughly convinced that I was adopted. Because, I mean, I had this blonde hair, and they both had dark hair, and
Plus man only rings twice, right?
yeah, and so I finally get brave enough to ask my sister, who was 3 years older than me, that I said, I think I'm adopted. And she said, what? You think they had you because they wanted you? They had 6 children. They wouldn't have adopted you.
Oh, wow.
And I walk out of the room thinking, oh, I wish I were adopted.
That is funny.
You think they
They think he wanted you? I adopt me. I had 6 kids. Why would they want to adopt you? Yeah. That's funny. But you know, I did have a blessing for being adopted because I gained this family, you know, and this love, and otherwise I wouldn't have had that. So.
Now, how did you and Chuck Lewis get to be such good friends?
Well, my first call was San Francisco.
Oh, that's right. You were at St.
1975.
John's. Okay.
And while I was there, Roberto and I became friends with Chuck because he was at my installation.
Right. Okay.
And he talked to us about night ministry and invited us to join him on the streets as assistant night ministers. So we did that. That's how we got to know him. Of course, we socialized together. We had parties, and we knew Chuck was. Of course, he wasn't out then either. He was not out. He didn't come out till he was in 1978 at the Dignity Convention in San Diego. We were there for that.
I've never heard him say it out loud.
No.
I haven't either.
No, never.
He's always been rather, you know, objective about everything, you know, how Chuck is. But and Joe Chadwick blew me away because I would think of all people who would know him or anybody else would be his dear friend Joe, but she says, I was the last one to figure it out. I said, Joe, how could you be so clueless? He wore Argyle socks for crying out loud.
And
How
see,
could you pass up that clue?
and that's how I to hear. Well, in fact, so Chuck was the one that had those minutes that from
The Senate Council meeting?
Senate.
Because I sent him documentation.
Yeah, because we
I
had
wonder
gotten
if he
to
still
know
has
him.
those. I wonder if he
I
still.
bet he does. So
He's so organized.
he had. So I'd gotten to know him, and then of course Norm and I were talking about that horrible
Incident.
incident, and so that's when we got to know Chuck, and so then.
Chuck's a
Yeah.
sweetheart. Oh, he was a strong advocate when I was going through my trial with the church. Yeah, Howard Erickson, who was involved with the concern at the time, was very helpful in helping me frame issues and language. I had a lot of support, a lot of allies. My congregation in Houston wrote letters.
Before you came, we were talking too about, I mean, the very fact that this happened in Texas,
Right?
early Texas.
Yeah, miles of babes. Yep.
Yeah. Huh.
Well, you could tell from Stutman was just his main worry at the very end when I was finally before I had the final vote. I went and spoke with him privately. I said, "What is your main concern about all this?" Well, my main concern is not about you being gay. It's about the fact that you're with a Catholic priest. Aren't they supposed to be celibate? Oh, so you're putting him on trial, not me? You know, what's this all about, you know? That's what he told me.
All
So it's
comes
his
back
fault.
to the Reformation.
Yeah, it's all his fault.
It's not his fault. Those Catholics, they'll ruin us Lutherans every time.
And was he still serving a...
At the time he was, yes. Well,
Yes.
Roberta was, who was, Roberta? No.
Because you said they...
Roberta was a Roman Catholic priest.
right, that was... but didn't the AELC get him to do some work in
He was
Houston?
the ALC before that.
ALC,
He had left that ministry before this all happened.
I see, okay.
He was there from 77 to about 79, and shortly before, and then he went to work for Family Service Association. He started doing counseling because he had his master's in psychology, and then he got involved in the chaplaincy ministry at the Port of Houston. Then he had a St. Mark's, the Evangelist Parish in the south side of Houston. He was a supply pass priest there. He did weddings and all that good stuff. And then what happened to him eventually after I got removed in 1986, he was a Franciscan priest, so he was an order priest. And he had a group of lay Franciscans meeting called Third Order Franciscans, and they got real intimate with each other one night and shared private information about each other. Roberto came out about our relationship to them, thinking that it would be kept in confidence. Well, sure enough, one of the lay women went and told the bishop. And the bishop called Roberto and says, "Is this true? You're living with this man?" "Yes, Bishop." "Well, you can no longer have faculties in this diocese. You have to go back to your order at Santa Barbara Province in California." Roberto told the bishop, "Bishop, if I'm not good enough to have faculties here, I'm not good enough to have faculties over there either, so kiss off and goodbye."
You both got defracked then.
Huh?
You both got defracked.
Yes. Well, he never, in the Catholic, priests are never, once a priest, always a priest, unless you get laicized by the Pope. He applied for laicization, never received a response.
So the Pope would really like him to be a priest, though.
Apparently so. Well, of course, at the time it was Pope. It was before John Paul II. Yeah.
Huh. Was there anything else that you think people should know about being a Lutheran or being a gay pastor?
Well,
there's law to
other
fall
than
back
this,
on.
the fact that